said, we are thrilled tonight to welcome Tayari Jones, whose novel, An American Marriage, was called wise and compassionate and beautifully written by the New York Times. This is her fourth novel, and it was chosen as Oprah's book club selection in January. Her writing has appeared in House, The Believer, The New York Times, and Kalalo. She's received the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, Lifetime Achievement Award in Fine Arts from the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, the United States Artist Fellowship, an NEA Fellowship, and the Radcliffe Institute Bunting Fellowship. She teaches creative writing at Emory University. And we're also pleased to welcome Donna Seaman, from the adult book editor at Booklist, who is one of the content editors and selectors of the museum content that you see before you today. So Donna has been a huge partner with the institution, and she is deeply involved in helping us get off the ground. So she is going to be interviewing Tayari following a short reading. So please welcome Tayari Jones and Donna Seaman.
Hi. It's so nice to see everyone. I really appreciate you coming out. I really do. Thank you so much. And thank you, Donna.
Oh, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
It's so nice to, I have never met Donna in real life, but I've always read her reviews in Booklist, and Booklist is one of the few publications that has reviewed every one of my books.
That's right. We know a good writer when we find one.
Thank you.
Well, this is so exciting. Tayari, you're going to read first from your newest book, An American Marriage. And this is my copy, but I'll loan it to you for a moment.
I'll just read.
Of course.
I don't have my glasses. It'll be all right, though.
You're going to play.
It'll be okay.
I can loan you some.
Oh, really? Could you? Yeah, I don't have my glasses. This glasses to read thing is new to me.
Well, if it's new, then they'll probably be strong enough.
I've discovered it lately. They've been making the writing in books smaller and smaller. If this doesn't go the way we want it to, Roy said the day before his trial, I don't want you to wait for me. Keep making your art and doing all the things you need to do. This is going to work out, I promise. You didn't do it. I'm looking at so much time, he said. I can't ask you to throw your life away from me. His words and his eyes were speaking two different languages, like someone saying no while nodding his head yes. No one's going to throw anything away, I said. I had faith in those days. I believed in things. But what I now know is this. They didn't believe me. 12 people and not one of them took me at my word. There in front of the room, I explained that Roy couldn't have raped the woman in room 206 because we had been together. I told them about the magic fingers that wouldn't work, about the movie that played on the snowy television. The prosecutor asked me what we had been fighting about. Rattled, I looked to Roy and to both our mothers. Banks objected, so I didn't have to answer, but the pause made it appear that I was concealing something rotten at the pit of our very young marriage. Even before I stepped down from the witness stand, I knew that I had failed him. Maybe I wasn't appealing enough, not dramatic enough, too not from around here. Who knows? Uncle Banks, coaching me, had said, now is not the time to be articulate. Now is the time to give it up, all filter. No filter, all heart. No matter what you're asked, what you want the jury to see is why you married him. I tried, but I didn't know how to be anything other than well-spoken in front of strangers. I wish I could have brought a selection of my art, the Man Moving series, all images of Roy. I would say, this is who he is to me. Isn't he beautiful? Isn't he gentle? But all I had were words which are light and flimsy as air. As I took my seat, not even the black lady juror would look at me. It turns out that I watch too much television. I was expecting a scientist to come and testify about DNA. I was waiting for a pair of handsome detectives to burst into the courtroom at the last minute, whispering something urgent. Everyone would see that this was a big mistake, a major misunderstanding. We would all be shaken but appeased. I fully believed that I would leave the courtroom with my husband beside me. Secure in our home, we would tell people how no black man is really safe in America. 12 years is what they gave him. We would be 43 years old when he was released. I couldn't even imagine myself at such an age. Roy understood that 12 years was an eternity because he sobbed right there at the defendant's table. His knees gave way and he fell into his chair. The judge paused and demanded that Roy bear this news on his feet. He stood again and cried, not like a baby, but in a way that only a grown man can cry, from the bottom of his feet up through his torso and finally through his mouth. When a man wails like that, you know it's all the tears he was never allowed to shed. As Roy howled, my fingers kept worrying a rough patch of skin beneath my chin, a souvenir of scar tissue. When they did what I remember as kicking in the door, what everyone else remembers as opening it with the key, after it was open, however it was open, we were both pulled from the bed. They dragged Roy into the parking lot, and I followed, lunging for him, wearing nothing but a white slip. Somebody pushed me to the ground, and my chin hit the pavement. My slip rode up, showing everything to everyone, and my tooth sank into the soft skin of my bottom lip. Roy was on the asphalt beside me, barely beyond my grasp, speaking words that didn't reach my ears. I don't know how long we lay there, parallel like burial plots, husband, wife, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder.
Very powerful. Thank you so much. So you get a sense of the power of the voice. That's Celestial, one of the characters. But I'd like to begin by talking about the distinctive voices in this novel. How did you craft each one? And how did you make them, we both get their thoughts, as in that case. We hear them speak, and they write letters.
Well, I started writing this novel. I had a fellowship. I went to Harvard for a year to research mass incarceration, because I wanted to write a novel. I had written other novels before, but they were really me sorting out my own emotional landscape. And I felt that it was time for me to turn my eye, more outward instead of looking inward. I think I came to writing with this sense of like, you can use your writing to heal yourself, and just writing just in and of itself is a defiant act. And that comforted me for a while. But once I hit 40, I was thinking, now it's time to write about somebody else, something else, to do more work. So I went to Harvard to do this research on incarceration, and I found out all these terrible statistics. Like the US is 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of its prisoners. 1 in 28 kids in the US has a parent in prison. It's a huge, the prison population has risen 300% in 30 years. No, 500% in 30 years. So I was learning all this, but I didn't have voices in my head. I didn't have characters talking to me. I had problems keeping me up at night, but not characters talking to me. And for me to write a novel, I have to have a story. But because, I'm a writer, not an activist. But I feel like when you say I'm a writer, not an activist, it sounds like you're saying you don't care. But it's just like that's not the way that I can use writing to make a point. And so I went home to Atlanta, and I was in the mall, and I heard a couple arguing. And I heard the woman say, "Roy, you know you wouldn't have waited on me for 7 years." And I looked at him, I looked at her, and I said, she's right. He would not have waited on her for 7 years. But then he turned back to her and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. This wouldn't have happened to you in the first place." And I thought, that's probably right. It wouldn't have happened to her in the first place. And when I feel that I have two characters that both have a point, then I know that I can write a story. And that's how I came to write a story about a young couple separated from his incarceration and what happens when he gets home. And that's how I came to decide to use those voices.
Such a powerful story, and just shows you how writers, your antenna are always up. You're always open to experience. So instead of writing directly about prison, you take they're newlyweds, really. They're very young.
They've only been married 18 months. As she says, her daddy was still paying for the wedding when it happened.
And they're facing this terrible separation, and the next section in the book is all letters between the two of them. And it's an incredibly poignant approach, and you watch the changes. The letters get shorter and shorter. What they have to say to each other gets tougher and tougher. So it's really, almost like a lab experiment on a marriage. What happens when you can't be together and soothe each other in person? And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about writing those letters and, that sort of epistolatory novel form.
Well, I write letters in real life. I write lots of letters. I enjoy it. But when I was thinking about this couple, I felt like letters was a perfect way to show, like he even says, he's looking at the paper and pen, and he says, I'm looking at this pen thinking, this is all I have to be a husband with. And so the small piece of paper shows just how small of a canvas they have, literally, to try and be a couple. And also, when you read a novel, you are experiencing vicariously what the characters experience. And prison is brutality. And I did not want you as a reader to have to experience brutality. I didn't want me as a writer to have to experience brutality. But I also wanted to explain the deprivation that he felt while he was in prison. And I felt that letters was a good way because we only know the things he would tell her. So he would shield her from some of the more disturbing details, yet you can still tell what he was going through.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And sort of an aside to this, Tayari just had an op-ed in the New York Times last week. It's the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's birth. There's a new collection out, The Prison Letters. And what a profound parallel between your novel and that book.
When I read Mandela's letters, we think of Nelson Mandela and all of the heroic things he did. But when we read the letters, we also get to see him as a person, as a man separated from his family. Prison is family separation, and it's happening on our border, but it's also happening right in our cities. Every person in prison is separated from your loved ones, and when you are taken from your loved ones, you're taken away from the relationships that make you who you are. It necessarily robs you of some of your personality, some of the way you understand yourself. But with Mandela's letters, too, I was struck by the way his wife existed in his head to keep him going. Like, he kept writing things like, I always think of you as the girl I loved. But, so many things were happening to her life. She was fighting for the ANC, and she was growing older. She's almost 50. She is 50 when he's released, but he's writing her letter saying, I still remember you as a girl, because that's what kept him going. The idea of her was as important as the person that she was. And I think that's what happens to Roy and Celestial, too. Like, Roy is in prison, and the idea of his wife is what he keeps thinking about at night, not so much the person of her. And it's so hard to live up to someone's imaginary picture of you.
Yes, that's really the profound exchange. And I was really fascinated. Celestial's an artist, and you have her making dolls. And these are very powerful, often kind of disturbing dolls. I wonder if you could talk about where the idea for that artwork came from.
Well, I definitely want to write about a woman, a black woman who is an artist. Haven't seen very many depictions of black women artists in literature and film. So I wanted, and almost everybody I know is an artist. So it seems to me like such a hole in the depiction that there are no artists. So I wanted to write about it. I didn't want to make her a writer, because I think that gets weird when writers write about writers. And also, writers are boring to read about because writing doesn't have any action. Writing looks like this. That's why there are not that many movies about writers. There's nothing to watch them do. But I had the idea to make her a doll maker because I have a friend who is an incredible doll maker, and I would watch her make dolls. Like, she would wear magnifying glasses and just sew all these little beads on them. And dolls are such a perfect metaphor too for women's art, because it is art. She spends years sometimes making the dolls, but people regard them as toys for girls, like some girl stuff and folk art. And so she's also struggling for legitimacy, but also it's an accessible art form. Like, as she says, she makes these dolls and children can play with them. So I think all artists walk that line between, you want people to enjoy your art, but they treat you like if too many people enjoy it, it can't be real, back and forth. And also all the issues about children in the story, the dolls work in that way too.
Yes, they're very profound. They really resonate in the story. You know, marriage is in the title of your book, and we see examples of other marriages. And Celestial and Roy both look to their parents, who have their suffering and their secrets too, to try and understand what marriage is about as they try and figure out what to do in the future. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the generational differences you cover very subtly in the novel.
Well, I think that our parents' courtship story is our first exposure to propaganda. Like, that story is always presented to you to teach you a lesson of some type. Like, my parents' courtship story is that they met in 1962 at an NAACP meeting at the University of Illinois, where they were some of the first black students. You see, so they value education, civil rights, respectable romance, you know. And that's a story always told to me, that, you know, they met, my mother made a point, my father disagreed, she got mad, she walked out. He didn't follow her, she went back in, she walked out. He didn't follow her, she went back in, she walked out, he followed her, then she started walking faster, you know, and then they get married. So that's, and that's the way that you know, that was their lesson to me. But a few years ago, last time I was on tour, I met another couple that met at that same NAACP meeting. And the way they tell the story is that my dad and this other guy, they called the NAACP meeting as a way to get the phone numbers and contact information for all the sisters on campus. But that this couple, so this other couple tells it like the man had this scheme to meet all these women, but he laid eyes on the one who was the one, and therefore abandoned his plan to call everyone else. So you see, so the message that they're sending is like, it doesn't matter what your intentions are, when you meet the one, you'll start to act right. You see, so that's their propaganda story. So I was looking to the characters in the book, how they look to their parents' romance, but they are all looking at their parents' romances not as propaganda, but as the truth. Like, they haven't learned yet that it's a little bit of scam in the way your parents explain things to you. But I think the main generational difference between the parents and the children it's something that I feel happens not just in questions of romance, which is, how happy do you expect to be? Because if you think about it, I'm 47, so my parents grew up during Jim Crow. So they just had different expectations of how much happy a person should expect to have. Like, when I wanted to go to school to get my MFA in creative writing, my parents thought this was kind of a ridiculous idea. But I was like, I don't feel satisfied doing what I'm doing. I don't feel fulfilled. I want to chase my dream. I want to be a writer. And my father said to me, you know what your problem is? He said, you never had to pick cotton. He said, when you pick cotton, you don't stand out there and say, am I challenged by the cotton? Do I feel fulfilled out here? He said, you don't say, this cotton field is not my niche. He said, you just pick the goddamn cotton. He said, you young people think every day is supposed to be the weekend. The weekend is just 2 days. The rest of the days is for work. And I think that with these characters in marriage is similar. Celestial feels unhappy. Her husband is in prison. She can never see him. She wants to be an artist. She wants the life she signed up for. She wants to be happy. And her dad is like, what is this happy? What are you talking about? You are in this marriage and it's supposed to be work. Now go work. So I think she thinks that she's supposed to be happy. She thinks she has a right to be happy. And no one else thinks that she does. And I think it's largely generational and gendered.
Yes. Gender, absolutely.
Yes, the two G's, generational and gendered.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about that. You know, there's incredible suspense to this novel. And the moral dilemmas just pile up. They thicken and thicken at each phase. And I had no idea where it was going. I mean,
me either.
That's what I want to ask you.
Yeah, when I write novels, I don't know what's going to happen. Really? And so I like to feel breathless and stressed when I write, the same way you feel breathless and stressed when you read. Like, if I were to figure it out early, just like if I were to, someone spoils it for you, you don't want to keep reading. If I spoiled it for myself, I wouldn't want to keep writing it. So I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, as soon as it became a love triangle, I was like, uh-oh. I was afraid somebody was going to get killed.
Me too.
Yeah, I was really,
Yeah.
really, really worried.
Yeah.
It could have gone either way.
Oh, you are making me very anxious. This is not a book to read casually. You are invested in this. That's fascinating. So that sounds really difficult.
Yeah, I would not recommend to anyone else to write a book that way. I think that's why it took me 6 years, because I kept following I kept trying to find where it was going to go, and I didn't know how to end it. We have a love triangle. We have Roy, who is incarcerated, no fault of his own, and all he wants to do is come home and find a faithful woman and a clean house, right? That's all he wants. It's like he wants the same things that they wanted, like in the Odyssey, and that was 60 BC. But he suffers so much. Then we have Celestial, and she wants everything in life that we want. She wants to be happy, she wants to pursue her art, she wants to feel value for what she does, and she wants to have a love life that she can actually participate in, which is reasonable. So I felt like, okay, and then we have Andre, who feels like, I've loved this woman since I was 6 months old. What do you want me to do, not love her? So I had these three people in this love triangle, and I had to figure out, what could I do for all of them? I felt equally attached to all of them, and it took me 6 years to work it out, but I'll tell you what I realized. I realized that I was allowing Roy to drag me through this story. Roy thinks the question of his life is how he can get back what he's lost. He feels like he's lost his job, he's lost his car, he's lost his house, he's lost his woman, he's lost his mother. So he's going to everyone in his life saying, what can you give me that I've lost? Can you help me? Can you help me? But what he's lost, I realized, is his citizenship. And by that I mean, he's lost his citizenship in his own life. We are citizens of our own lives, of our communities, of our country, by what we can give back. You join a community by giving to that community. And he didn't realize that he could give anyone anything. And I didn't realize that he could give anyone anything. And that's why I was stuck kind of on this hamster wheel, because in light of what he suffered, he can never get back the material things he's lost. And I realized that what he can get back is emotional, which is realizing that he has something to offer another person.
That's really profound. So here we are in the American Writers Museum. You've spent 6 years writing a really magnificent and beautiful novel.
Thank you.
You're a professor of creative writing, which is hard work also. And I'm wondering if you can tell us who some of your founding writers are. Who's inspired you? I know you started writing as a very young girl.
I wrote as a child. You know how you, like little child, you write books and you staple them. But I didn't know that I could be a writer. I didn't know that was something available for me to be. And I honestly think part of it is because I was a girl. And as a girl, a teenage girl, I felt like the only question anyone was asking about me was, are you nice? Are you a nice girl? Are you polite? Are you well behaved? Are you not chasing behind boys? And if you say, oh, I like to read a lot and I write things in my little journal, people think it's about your character. No one ever said to me, well, what are you writing? What are you reading? Talk to me. Like, it wasn't coded as me being an intellectual. It just meant I was nice. And I think that's a grave disservice we do girls and all that. It's just the only question is, are you nice? Does your mother have to worry about you getting in trouble? But when I went to college, I went to Spelman College in Atlanta, and I met a writer. She was my teacher. Her name is Pearl Clegg. And I was a kid. I was like 17, and I took a class from her. I forged my advisor's signature because underclassmen were not allowed. But I felt like I had to take this class. And I sat there, and I have to say the advisor found out and called me in, but I will be grateful to her forever because she didn't make me drop the class. And she told me later, she's like, when a kid wants to take a class that bad, she said, I just hurt your feelings, but I let you stay in. But Pearl took me under her wing, and she showed me what the writer's life was like, and the idea of writing as responsibility, and how writing brings people together as community. And I always have felt like she taught me that this was what I was called to do. And one time she asked me, she said, what are you thinking? And I got ready to tell her, and she says, no, write it down. And in that, she became my first audience. But other writers I adore, I am obsessed with Toni Morrison. Obsessed. I'll tell you how obsessed. I have on my desk a little bit of dirt from the town of Lorain, Ohio, where she's from. And sometimes I sprinkle a little bit, and if I have a student with a really, really, really serious problem, I'll give them just a pinch. Just a little pinch of that Toni Morrison dirt.
Oh, you're very generous. Well, so Toni Morrison, any other writers?
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah.
Like I was just saying when I was a child, how much I loved Charlotte's Web when I was little. And I didn't understand how the spider wrote some pig. Because I was like, what does that mean, some pig? Some pig? And my teacher said, no, it's like this, some pig. And so when I was a child and I'd be nervous if I had to give a little speech or something, I would just say, some pig, terrific, radiant, humble. All the words that Charlotte said to Wilbur to like buck myself up. So I've just always loved books, but also I read a lot of not terribly intellectual things as well. I read a lot of murder mysteries. Because even though, I consider myself a serious writer, whatever that means, I like a story that moves. Like, this is super plotty.
Yes, this moves.
Yeah,
this really is.
I'll have a mistaken identity or a coincidence in a minute. I don't care. Because I always assume that your reader isn't necessarily committed to finishing the book. Like, you have to give the reader an incentive to turn pages.
Well, and story is what we want. So there's ideas. I mean, you started out thinking about mass incarceration, but you didn't want to write a report. You're not a sociologist. You're not a journalist. So all that, but I can feel that pulsing beneath this. But it's deep down, and what you give us, the closing third of this book is absolutely riveting. And every chapter, something else is changing, something else is happening. It's really hard to do that, but it's never just surface. They're dealing with really profound dilemmas.
Well, I feel like a lot of times when people get ready to write, they're like, well, how do I work in mass incarceration? How do I, like someone said, was it hard for you to match a love triangle and mass incarceration? But I was like, no, because that's real life. Like in real life, we deal with things on different levels, right? Like Roy is wondering, the question on the surface is like, who is Celestial going to pick, Roy or Andre? But then on another level, it's a question about marriage itself. Like, what is commitment? How does commitment work? How is the expectation of commitment different from men than from women? This idea, this assumption of chastity, does it go both ways? And then the question of wrongful incarceration or mass incarceration. There are 4 million people in prison in the United States right now. And that means that in every room, a room this size, there are people related to people in prison, the people who love people in prison, and it isn't a separate issue in their life. It's woven through their lives. So if your novel mimics real life, it'll do things on different levels.
That's beautifully put. That's what fiction does. That's exactly what it
Sometimes.
does. Yeah, when it works, the good fiction. So I'll ask you one more question because I'm sure we have questions in the audience. This American Marriage was selected by Oprah Winfrey for her book club.
This is true.
I think. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, having watched other writers experience this, I think this kind of turned your life upside down a little bit.
It turned my life not really upside down because I've written other novels before, and I do feel really grateful that it didn't happen at the start of my career where I had kind of already set in my mind what my goals are and what is important to me. I always have centered my writing around readers. And I think this is because earlier in my career, people don't realize this, but An American Marriage is my 4th novel, and it was my first novel to even be reviewed by the New York Times. So I felt kind of earlier in my career excluded from literary power in a way. And so if I was going to keep being a writer, I had to ask myself, okay, then why am I writing? It's obviously I can't be writing for the New York Times. I can't be writing for prize committees because they're not paying attention to me. And I concentrated in my heart on my readers. And I was really fortunate in mentors. When I was a little baby writer, I got a letter from Nikki Giovanni, and she invited me to come to her house. And she was going to talk to me about being a writer. And so I packed my little overnight bag and I stayed at her house, and she just talked to me, and she said to me, take care of your readers. She said, the women who are reading your book now, if you take care of them, they will take care of you for the rest of your life. She said, these women will come to your funeral. That's what she So I was always focused on my readers and measuring my success that way. But I was driving my car, minding my business like an ordinary person, and I had a block call come through. And I answer block calls because I'm nosy. I mean, that person blocked that call for a reason, and I want to know what it is. So I said, hello? And on the other line, she said, hi, this is Oprah. And her voice is very distinct. So I put on the hazard lights and I pulled over. And, I'm born and raised in Georgia, so I said what any Southerner would say. I said, ma'am? And she said she wanted to use the book for her book club selection. And what did I think about that? I said, I think that would be very nice. Thank you. But you know what it made me think about, really? That because she's Oprah, that she was lending her good name to my project. That to lend someone your name is such a giant offering. And I was aware of it because it's Oprah, but I realized how many people throughout my life have lent me their good name. Like, when I wanted to go to college, my high school counselor, she lent her good name to my application. When you want to get an apartment, someone has to lend their good name. So I was aware of the weight of it because it was Oprah, but it made me realize that this is a kindness and a generosity that we give to each other, every day.
It's a really good perspective. Well, I'll ask a final question. Do you have any thoughts about the next book, or is it too soon?
I have little thoughts, but I haven't really had any quiet time to think about the next book, and I'm waiting for it to come to me. I feel usually this close to having finished one book, I would be about 150 pages into what I'll call the rebound book. It's not the real book, but I just got done with the old book, and it was such a cute idea, and I started talking to it, and I thought, maybe this could be the book, and I would be in that part where I would be realizing that the rebound book was not the real book, and then get ready to meet the real book. So I'm hoping that being on tour all this time is just sparing me the rebound book.
Oh, we hope so too. Thank you so much, Tayari.
Thank you.
Now, questions in the audience? All right, I'm going to start back there.
I think we should give one of them a mic.
Yeah, is there a mic? Will we see a movie?
I think so. I mean, we're in production, but it's a lot more to it than I thought. But they're working. I'm not writing the screenplay, but it's being worked on. Oprah is doing the producing. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I'm excited about it and afraid about it. Because the movie really is somebody else's baby. Like, you have to let go of control and let the person make it into something. So we'll see, but what will I wear?
Question here?
You mentioned the way the book came about and how you didn't know the end. I'm curious, the backstories of all the characters, how did you arrive at that? And now that I know you went to Spelman, I guess I had read that before, but it just resonated. Did you use some of your own personal background in those backstories?
Well, when I started writing a novel, I don't know the characters. I just have like a vague, it's just like when you meet people in real life. You make assumptions about them because of how they present. And some of them turn out to be right. Like, they say you can't judge a person by 5 minutes, but you kind of can. You kind of can. But then as I write, I learn more things about them as I keep going. And then when I reach the end of the book, I write it over again from the beginning, armed with all this new knowledge, and then I layer it out. But I did want to include Spelman College in the book because I wanted to look at HBCU as just a normal experience, just because I'm from Atlanta. It's like, in DC, like everybody in DC went to Howard, like it's just in the air. I wanted to do that for this experience, not feel like now we're going to look at the fraternity traditions at a black college. You know, I just wanted just to be a college.
More questions in front here?
One thing I found really interesting.
Here you go. Here you go.
Oh. Thank you, Carrie. I found it really interesting that Roy had some indiscretions or whatever early on in the marriage, or before everything happened, or that were alluded to, and kind of that juxtaposition between then Celestial's kind of deciding not to like move away from Roy. Did you do that on purpose, or kind of how did that come about?
I'm so confused. Tell me again.
Okay, sorry.
Just say it. Don't be cute. Just tell me. Okay.
So in the beginning of their marriage, Roy has
A little bit of a cheater.
phone, yes, and so that kind
Like
of
a little bit of a cheater. Yeah.
and so that compared to her decision to kind of move away from Roy and with Andre. Did you mean to kind of put those together?
Well, I mean,
Or
I
how
do
did that-
think that there are different standards. Like, I don't think there's a such thing as a woman that's a little bit of a cheater, right? Like, if a woman cheats at all, then she's a cheater. But a man, he's just a little, you know, he's not like a hardcore cheater. You know, as he says, I come home to you every night. But and she's like, well, it is true. But for women, it's a different kind of thing. So I was looking at the different standards. But I have to say that when I was writing it, and I knew that Celestial had taken a lover, I had to decide, like, for the sake of readers, what kind of lover, what would be the least problematic lover for her to take? But I decided it could be nothing, because when I chose Andre, her childhood friend, they've known each other since they were two babies bathing in the sink. But then it was like, well, why did she pick him? She's known him all this time. Why that? So it was like she knew him too well. But if I had made it a stranger, it would have been like, I can't believe she would run off with a stranger. I felt like there was no acceptable way for her to own her sexuality. That's what I realized when I was writing it. But I did feel that with Andre, having loved her all his life, that it would kind of give a little extra legitimacy to their relationship, because I felt like she really needed it. I didn't realize this, but I was talking to a screenwriter about this book, and she said that it's very rare in a film for you to see a woman have more than one lover in a film, that readers can't get their head around it. They can't bear to see it. And so that was like part of the question of how they were going to handle this, that it pushes people away. Who knew, right? But think about it. Now you're like,
Really interesting.
yeah, unless it's a movie about her being loose.
Wow, interesting.
There's somebody behind you.
My question, I'm wondering if this is coming from your research at Harvard when you studied, but Roy had a lot of support while he was in prison, and a lot of it came from Celestial's family. His father was still on his side, and when he got out of prison, his father was like, okay, you're gonna go and you're gonna fight for your wife. And even Celestial's father was like, you're wrong, you should, fight for your husband. Like, how, is that something that you got from your research at Harvard? Like, black men need the support especially when they're wrongly incarcerated, or is that something that only a black man, that they felt like they could understand and support him in that manner?
I did feel like Roy, as a black man wrongfully incarcerated for the crime of rape, that he became a symbolic person. Like, he had a symbolic struggle. And everyone in his life is totally supportive of him, because it's like the worst possible case scenario happened to him. He did everything right. So, he went to college, he got a good job. It was like kind of a unicorn in a way already. And then it was like the past came up and swallowed him, and so that everyone supports him, not just for the individual that he is, but for what he represents. But I was thinking about, though, what would it mean to be in a relationship with someone who always has the moral high ground? Because of what he suffered, you could never oppose him and be right, because he suffered so much. And what would that do for your relationship? How could you be peers? So Celestial's father, who didn't even really like him that much, it's like, you got to take care of it. That man is a hostage of the state. You have to take care of him. And that was interesting to me. But this is something interesting I did learn in my research. Women provide almost all the support for incarcerated people, men and women, that's a number one leading cause of Black female poverty, which leads to eviction. And I don't know if you read this book, Eviction, that won the Pulitzer a couple years ago. It's really suggesting that eviction is to Black women what incarceration is to Black men. Because once you get thrown out of your home with your kids, you're in a spiral of homelessness and can't really come back. The stats are staggering, but the cost of taking care of someone in prison, incredible, the cost of the phone calls. So I was really looking at that, and also looking at the way that prison then changes the gender dynamics of that relationship. If a man is in prison, she becomes the breadwinner, and he is dependent on her for basic things, and that also makes a kind of friction in their relationship.
Really interesting.
Hi, thank you. In our book club, there was a discussion about the race of the person the accuser. And there were some that thought she was Caucasian, some who thought she was African American. So did you purposely
Not tell?
Yes.
It's funny, we're making a movie and the screenwriter was like, we're gonna have to show this person. And I was like, can't she just be in the dark? Do we have to? There's this Toni Morrison story about two girls who are in foster care, and they're having all these, and it follows them through their whole life, and they're having all these racial disputes, and you don't know which one is Black and which one is white, and the people fight about it. So I was doing every book I write, I make these little nods to Toni Morrison, because one day I want her to notice me. And I'll have my books as proof of my love and how long I've been loving her. But I don't identify her race, because I was so worried that if I identified her race, that it would become like such a distraction from the rest of the story that we couldn't go any further. So I tried to just like get real in and out really quick with her. But I know, but I'm not telling.
But it was a lot of fun for us to discuss.
What did y'all think?
Yeah, it's like, why did you think that? Oh, really?
Another question?
Way in the back.
I saw you. I'll get you next.
I thought it was interesting how the crime took place in a different state from where they lived. And do you think that would have made any difference at all in their relationship if he had been incarcerated closer to where they lived and it was easier for her, just timing-wise, to be able to visit him?
If she didn't have to drive 8 hours each way.
Right.
Everything is more convenient if you don't have to drive 8 hours each way. But a lot of people, even because the United states are so large, a lot of people are incarcerated far, far from home, even though they're in the same state. And I chose Louisiana for two reasons. One, my dad is from a small town in Louisiana, and I've always thought of Daddy as being an immigrant to Atlanta. I feel like he thinks of himself like that, like we're the children of his Atlanta bourgeois life, and also post Jim Crow. Like it's like a different world where I live versus where he grew up. So I looked at that interstate migration, because especially up here in Chicago, we think a lot about the Great Migration, people going to the north, but a lot of people went to the urban centers of the South. But I do think this how hectic it was did make a big difference in their relationship. Now here's a question for you. Do you think their relationship would have lasted even if he hadn't gone to prison? No. It could have gone either way, right? See, I think that's what happened with his incarceration, is that his incarceration, okay, you know how like when you're Black, they say you always have to be twice as good, right? You have to be twice as good to be half as much. For this relationship to survive, they would have had to have been super couple. And so they would have had to been just, even in your personal life, you have to be twice as good. And that's why I don't blame any of them for how it shook out, because I felt like they shouldn't have had to be in that situation in the first place. Wait, we got to call her in the back. Okay, you got your mic? Okay.
Stand up. With Roy's character being incarcerated, that character development, how did you get to the point of meeting the biological...
No spoilers.
I got you, though. I'm going to handle it.
Okay.
I'm going to use that little Men in Black thing to erase that from your minds. It's true. Roy is incarcerated. Incarceration is not a good place for fiction because it's not enough to do. It's not enough. And that was also the problem in their relationship. Her plot line was moving forward in a different kind of way because she's out in the world with all these options. And so once he was in there, I was like, well, what is his plot line? And I was like, well, who do I have in the story with him? And then I was like, oh, I saw that person that you talked about. And I thought they were going to have, something was going to happen between them, but when what happened, I was as shocked as anybody. And I was like, no wonder you've been so friendly. But then also, a lot of people are incarcerated with their relatives. Because you know what? What's the number one indicator that a boy will go to prison? Yeah, it happens all the time.
There's so much country-city contrast and class contrast that also plays into their marriage.
Well, I was also I'm interested in class mobility. There is a lot of class mobility in the African-American community because there's so many people who are first-generation college students. A first-generation college student changes the class trajectory of an entire family. Also, there are these studies that say that most people don't know anyone from a different class than they are, but I think in Black communities, people who, people from different classes as you call them your cousins, right? Think about it. Because look at where we are now. We are only 1.5 generations removed from Jim Crow, which means that is, if you look at your extended family, your first cousins, your second cousins, look at the range of people, and they're having all different kinds of lives, so that the class differences are real and they impact relationships, but people from other classes are not alien to you.
Interesting.
Time for one more?
Anyone here? Oh, here's someone.
Oh.
I thought Roy's father was such a gorgeous character. So,
Big Roy?
Yes, Big Roy. Was he based on anyone special to you, or he was so deep in his seemingly simple way, and he had such a depth of knowledge and wisdom, and I just really appreciated him as a character.
I liked him too. Those nice characters are almost never based on real people. I feel like those really nice characters are wish fulfillment on your own part. Like what you wish someone would come but I will say that most of my wish fulfillment in my writing though was on Roy. Just this idea, everyone Roy has ever met adores him. His mama loves him. His mother loves him so much that she had her tubes tied so he wouldn't have to deal with siblings, right? She just loves him. Big Roy loves him. He goes to high school, the French teacher loves him. He goes to prison, his cellmate loves him. He gets out of prison, Davina loves him. His in-laws love him. He is just, because he's this symbolic creature. He is just loved. And I just enjoyed inhabiting him. But what was hard for me in writing him though was he's been so loved so long, he takes it for granted. He doesn't realize that he has enjoyed so much emotional privilege in his own life, including his wonderful father, Big Roy.
So, talking about love, I felt like you really loved Black men when I was reading the book.
Some of them.
But romantically, you love the older generation, and the way that you got into the perspective of the dads, and I love the dads too. That was great. So my question is there a way that you are able to empathize with the view of others generationally or, sexually?
One of the things that I do when I try to write a character, also I'm close to my dad. I talk to my daddy all the time, and
We love you too.
oh, thank you. But I do think that people are complicated and men are complicated and masculinity is complicated. So what I try to do is separate the men themselves from the ideas of masculinity that are imposed on them. And in writing this, I saw how much these men are struggling with this idea of what it means to be a man and how they were sometimes boxed in by it. Like Roy's cellmate, you just see how that toxic masculinity has ruined his life. And the only chance he has really for redemption is through becoming vulnerable to another person, and that vulnerability wasn't available to him. So I have compassion in that way, in the way that I see that the boxes we all get put in keep us from loving each other the way we can. But there's a moment in the novel, at the beginning of this book is an epigraph from Claudia Rankine, which says, "What happens to you doesn't belong to you. It doesn't only concern you. It's not yours. Not yours only." And I feel that way about Black men and Black women, that what happens to us, we are not separate in our experiences, and that we can't tell our whole story without telling all of our story. So once I realized that these men's voices were indispensable to this story, I had to lean into them in a certain way. Because I first wanted to write this book all from the point of view of Celestial. I wanted to write about a woman who doesn't do what people tell her to do, but it wasn't the whole story. And I had to just lean into Roy, into his dad, into all of them, and figure out how can we move forward together.
Can I ask you a question about being a writer? I'm just so surprised when you said it takes 6 years, because this flows so smoothly, it seems. And yet, did you struggle with it? Do you write daily? Do you put it down and pick it up? How did that happen?
This one was hard. This one was hard because I was asking questions that I didn't know the answers to. Like my first novel is about growing up in Atlanta during the Atlanta child murders. All the characters are children. So I had a sense that I knew more than they did, and so I could write their stories more easily because they weren't challenging me in the way that these adult characters with this adult problem did. As far as writing every day, you don't have to. Everybody says you have to write every day. I think they tell people to write every day because really you need to write about 3 times a week. So if you tell people to write every day, it's like the gym. They tell you have to go to the gym 3 times a week. You can really go to the gym once a week, But I think that the problem is that when you tell people to write every day, people who have lifestyles that don't lend itself to writing every day, people who work, who have children, who do elder care, they think, oh, I can't be a writer because I can't do it every day. But then if we have a literary canon only written by people with lives of leisure, that is not reflecting who we really are. I would go so far as to say the people with the most important stories to tell, they can't write every day because they're busy, right? They're having the most important stories. So I feel like if you're working on something, you can write on it once or twice a week. It will take you longer than someone who has nothing else to do, but you will get finished with it. I don't outline, like I said, I write to see where the story is going, and I just keep going until I feel like I've finished. And I know I've finished when I write that last page, and I don't think about the characters really anymore. I often think that the end of the book is kind of like the end. Like sometimes people say, how do you know when it's finished and how do you know when to abandon a project? Because I have had books that I've written and I've abandoned them. And I feel like no one can tell you to abandon a project and no one can tell you when it's finished. I feel like it's like romance in that way. Like you know when it's done. And and sometimes you need to walk away, but you're not walking away just yet. You're just gonna give it a little more time. And I feel like with this book, I felt like when I was writing this book around year 4 and 5 of it, I felt like me and this book were in a relationship. We were not communicating. It was sleeping on the couch, but we couldn't afford to move out. And I thought that me and the book were done. I felt like, and so I was actually literally saving my money to repay the advance to the publisher because I thought I couldn't finish it. So I was like, no more Ubers, no more mimosa. But then I figured something out, and then me and the book, we rekindled it, and it all worked out.
So thank you all very much. Thank you, Tayari.